The cowboy made an impossible choice. When a runaway horse dragged an injured Apache woman toward certain death, he sacrificed the only horse he owned to save a complete stranger. He believed he had lost everything that day. But 1 week later, the Apache chief appeared at his cabin with dozens of warriors, and what happened next changed the cowboy's life forever. The late afternoon sun hung low above the Arizona frontier, painting the rocky hills in shades of gold and crimson. Daniel Brooks guided his tired horse along a narrow trail that wound through the desert. Every creak of the saddle reminded him how much he depended on the old gelding. The horse was not only his partner but also his livelihood. Without it, there would be no cattle work, no trading trips, and no easy way to cross the endless miles of rough country. Daniel reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the last piece of dried meat he carried. He broke it in half, giving the larger portion to his horse before eating the rest himself. "You have earned more than I have," he said with a faint smile. The horse nudged his shoulder as if it understood. A sudden cry shattered the quiet. Daniel pulled the reins and listened. The sound came again, carried by the wind from somewhere beyond a line of jagged rocks. He tied the reins to a nearby tree and hurried toward the voice. At the bottom of a rocky slope, he found a young Apache woman trapped beneath the fallen branch of a large cottonwood tree. One of her legs was pinned, and a frightened wild horse circled nearby, kicking at anything that came close. Daniel carefully approached. "I am here to help," he called. The woman looked at him with fear. "You should leave," she said weakly. "The horse will kill you." Daniel glanced at the frightened animal. It had likely been startled during a storm and thrown the woman before the tree collapsed. He picked up a long branch and slowly drew the horse's attention away from her. The frightened animal charged. Daniel jumped aside just in time. The horse crashed into his own tied horse. Startled, his faithful companion slipped backward onto the rocky slope. The reins caught on a sharp stone, and the horse tumbled down the hillside. Daniel shouted its name and rushed forward, but it was too late. His only horse lay motionless at the bottom of the ravine. For a brief moment, grief filled his face. Then he turned back toward the trapped woman. Without hesitation, he lifted the heavy branch with all his strength and pulled her free. As she struggled to stand, tears filled her eyes. "You lost everything because of me." Daniel looked toward the lifeless horse before answering quietly. "No. I lost a horse. But if I had walked away from you, I would have lost the kind of man I want to be." The young Apache woman leaned against a boulder, unable to put weight on her injured leg. Daniel found a nearby stream, filled his canteen, and gently cleaned the cuts on her hands and face. He tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped her swollen ankle as carefully as he could. "My name is Daniel," he said. She hesitated before answering. "I am Nita." Daniel nodded with a warm smile. "It is good to meet you, even if the circumstances are not." Nita looked toward the ravine where Daniel's horse still lay. "You should have saved your horse." Daniel shook his head. "There was no time to save both." She lowered her eyes. "My father always says every choice has a cost." "He is a wise man." Nita gave a faint smile. "He is our chief." Daniel paused. "The Apache chief is your father?" She nodded. "He sent me to gather herbs before the storm arrived." Daniel understood at once why she had been so worried. If Apache warriors found a white cowboy standing beside their wounded chief's daughter, they would likely assume the worst. Before either of them could speak again, the distant sound of galloping horses echoed through the canyon. Nita's expression changed. "They have found us." Within moments, nearly 30 Apache warriors appeared along the ridge. They rode down the slope with remarkable speed, surrounding Daniel before he could take a single step. Several warriors aimed rifles while others held their bows ready. One warrior shouted, "Move away from her." Daniel slowly raised his empty hands. "I mean no harm." The warriors ignored him and rushed to Nita's side. An older man wearing a feathered headdress rode forward. His presence alone commanded silence. The Apache chief. His eyes immediately fell upon his daughter's injured ankle before turning toward Daniel. "What happened here?" he asked. Nita stepped forward before anyone else could answer. "He saved my life." A few warriors exchanged doubtful glances. She continued, pointing toward the ravine. When the wild horse charged, he chose to rescue me instead of saving his own horse. The chief followed her gaze. Far below, Daniel's faithful horse still lay where it had fallen. The old chief remained silent for several moments. He slowly dismounted and walked to the edge of the ravine. Looking down, he understood exactly what had happened. When he returned, he faced Daniel. "You gave up the one thing that carried your future." Daniel answered calmly, "A horse can be replaced." The chief looked directly into his eyes. "And a life cannot." For the first time, respect replaced suspicion on the faces of the Apache warriors. The chief nodded once. "You will come with us." Daniel frowned slightly. "As your prisoner?" The chief's expression softened. "No, as my guest." Daniel walked beside the Apache warriors as they made their way through the winding mountain trails. Without his horse, every mile felt longer, yet no one rushed him. Nita stayed close, occasionally asking if he needed to rest. He always answered with the same quiet smile. "I will be fine." By sunset, they reached the Apache village. Families gathered as the chief returned with his daughter. Relief spread through the camp, and children ran to embrace Nita. Soon, however, every eye turned toward the stranger walking beside the chief. The chief raised his hand for silence. "This man is the reason my daughter stands before you today." He told the village how Daniel had sacrificed his only horse to save Nita without asking for payment or protection. An elderly woman stepped forward. She was the village healer. She carefully examined Daniel's scraped hands, which had been cut while lifting the fallen tree. "You carry wounds of service," she said gently. "Those deserve care." As she treated his hands, Daniel noticed several warriors preparing to ride out. "What has happened?" he asked. The chief sighed. "Our horses have been disappearing for many weeks. Thieves strike at night and vanish before sunrise." Daniel looked toward the nearly empty corral. "How many have you lost?" "Too many." He studied the broken fence and the tracks leading toward the hills. "These are not the work of wandering thieves," he said after a moment. The chief looked at him with interest. "What do you see?" Daniel knelt and pointed to the ground. "The same horses returned to this spot before being driven away again. Someone nearby is watching your village and waiting for the right moment." The chief frowned. "You believe the thieves will come back?" Daniel stood and nodded. "They already think no one has discovered their pattern." He looked toward the dark hills beyond the village. "If we are patient, we can catch them." The chief smiled quietly. "Perhaps losing one good horse has brought us a man worth far more." That night, Daniel and a small group of Apache warriors hid among the rocks overlooking the horse corral. The village appeared quiet, with only a few fires still burning. Hours passed without a sound. Just after midnight, faint hoofbeats echoed through the darkness. Daniel pointed toward the western trail. "They are here." 5 masked outlaws slipped into the village, moving carefully toward the horses. They worked quickly, believing everyone was asleep. Daniel waited until the last thief had entered the corral. "Now," he whispered. Apache warriors emerged from every direction. The startled outlaws reached for their weapons, but they were already surrounded. A brief struggle followed before the thieves surrendered. The chief walked forward and removed the mask from their leader. "I know this man," he said. "He has stolen from settlers and tribes alike." The remaining stolen horses were found hidden in a nearby canyon before sunrise. Every family whose animals had been taken celebrated their return. The chief turned to Daniel. "You gave up your own horse to save my daughter. Tonight, you helped save the future of our people." For the second time in a week, Daniel had expected nothing in return. Yet once again, his willingness to help others had changed far more lives than his own. The following morning, the entire village gathered beneath the shade of a great cottonwood tree. The recovered horses had been returned to their owners, and for the first time in many weeks, the camp was filled with laughter instead of worry. The chief stepped forward and called Daniel to stand beside him. "When you arrived, you were a stranger," he said. "Today, you leave as a trusted friend." A young warrior led a magnificent bay horse into the center of the gathering. The animal was strong, healthy, and far finer than the one Daniel had lost. The chief placed the reins in Daniel's hands. "This horse cannot replace the faithful companion you lost, but it carries our gratitude and the respect of every family in this village." Daniel gently stroked the horse's neck before looking at the chief. "I never helped your daughter expecting a reward." "I know," the chief replied with a smile. "That is exactly why you deserve one." Nita stepped forward and handed Daniel a small leather pouch. "Whenever you see this symbol, you will always be welcome among our people." As Daniel rode away across the open frontier, he looked back one final time. The chief, Nita, and the villagers stood together, raising their hands in farewell. Daniel had lost his only horse, but in choosing compassion over possession, he had gained something that would remain with him for the rest of his life: trust, friendship, and a place where he would always be welcomed. As Daniel disappeared into the endless frontier, he carried more than a new horse. He carried the respect of an entire Apache village and the lasting reminder that the greatest acts of courage often come with sacrifice. His choice proved that kindness is never truly lost. Even when it demands something precious, it has a way of returning in ways no one could ever expect. If this story inspired you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more original Western frontier stories filled with courage, honor, sacrifice, and unforgettable friendships. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you had been in Daniel's place, would you have saved your only horse or risked everything to save a complete stranger? We would love to hear your answer. Thank you for watching. Until our next journey across the Old West, remember that true strength is measured not by what we keep, but by what we are willing to give for someone in need.